Welcome to the Down South Hunting Podcast, episode number 2. Congratulations, you made it through the first episode. Hopefully that's going to be the worst one we ever do. So if you're still here, thank you so much for listening and downloading. We've got Lindsay Thomas Jr. coming on, which I'm really excited about. He's the communications director from the QDMA. We wanted to tell you a little bit about the type of lands we hunt and what we're into hunting. So Adam, I'm going to go ahead and let you get started, and then I'll talk about what I'm going to be doing this year.
Awesome. Yeah, as you know, and I've talked about it a little bit, I think I barely mentioned it in the last podcast episode in the intro. I said I had a hunting blog called Chase the Mountain. And in that hunting blog this year, I put out this thing where I said, hey, my hunting goal this year is to kill a Pope and Young whitetail. And I did that for a couple of reasons. First of all, my blog is kind of centered around goal setting and how to achieve goals in your hunting life and that sort of thing. But really, I'm trying to get back into whitetails. I feel like I've been on a break or a little bit of a hiatus from whitetails. About 10 years ago, I went on my first elk hunt. And as a kid, I always thought about going on that first elk hunt. And when I actually did, the bug bit me. And I literally for some reason, I just kind of lost my drive to deer hunt. And I actually killed a couple of really good deer during that time after I went on my elk hunt. But this year, I'm like, okay, I want to get back into whitetail hunting. I've done the elk hunting thing. I've been out west, done some mule deer hunting, turkey hunting. I love that. But my first love as far as hunting was concerned was in the whitetail woods. So I've been taking a real hard look and approach to how I'm going to make this 2017 a success in my own mind. And, I put a goal out there of killing a Pope and Young whitetail, but that's not ultimately, if I don't obtain that goal, that's fine. It's about having fun. It's about learning. I enjoy the educational process of taking on a new challenge. In this particular case, becoming a better deer hunter in my own mind. So I'm looking forward to that. So I've tried to line up a few different properties around my area. Within Tennessee, there's not a ton of really good public land where I live that's within an hour of my house, but I have been able to obtain permission from a couple of different properties. One, which is a new property for me this year. It's about 80 acres, and I have access to that right now. It's only 15 minutes away. I have another property that's about 180 acres, about an hour away. And then my family farm back home, which is 100 plus acres, which is about 3 hours away. That is the majority of the whitetail hunting I'll do in state. And now I'm going to announce something that my wife doesn't yet know. I'm actually planning a trip to North Dakota. I love you, Angela, but Alex Comstock from Whitetail DNA and myself are going to enjoy some whitetail hunting in North Dakota, where I have a much better chance of fulfilling that goal, making it a success in 2017. So that's really where my focus is. And I will say that I do have one goal every year from now on is to hunt out west, because I'm just absolutely in love with the western landscape, the mountains, the air, the elk. And so I'm going to make that a trip too. And I'm excited about 2017. How about you, Mike? What do you got lined up?
Man, that sounds like you got a good year coming up. That's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. I'm pretty new to hunting still, I feel like, even though it's been, I guess, over 10 years now, but I started from scratch. I didn't have family members teaching me each step of the way. I credit most of my hunting knowledge to either Hard Knocks or internet forum and podcasts as well. I'm always listening to hunting podcasts. I can't get enough podcast information. So, maybe some of my newbie status or my new excitement to it's going to wear off on the whitetails, Adam. I'm sure it will. And all these guests that we've got as well. I think it's going to be hard not to be obsessed with it. I'm sure my wife's going to be excited about that, me getting more obsessed with whitetail. But as far as where I hunt, I started out on public land here in Florida, and I still hunt quite a bit of public land. And one thing the way Florida's set up is it has open public land where basically anybody can hunt anytime, as long as it's hunting season, obviously. And then there's quota where you have to enter in to get a quota. And I've found that those quota hunts are way better quality. But some of those hunts, you got to wait 4 or 5 years to get them. So finally, some of those are rolling around where I'm getting on some of those properties. But also, my dad in the last couple of years bought 100 acres that borders a national forest. So I've been hunting that quite a bit. One issue with that is I've got a big family, and that family all likes to hunt that 100 acres. So I've actually found hunting the national forest around that area is actually more productive to me than actually hunting the private land. And then this year, I'm really excited about this. I'm not trying to get too excited because it's not finalized yet, but I've got some family with over 1,000 acres in the state that they're paying a timber company to manage food plots and stuff for them, and nobody hunts it. And I've offered them to come take care of their property for them in exchange for letting me hunt on it. And I'm hopefully going to be finalizing that in the next 2 weeks. If that happens, it's going to be a game changer for me. I'm really excited about the opportunity to get my kids involved. My oldest daughter's 10. I've got an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old right now. But I want to get my kids involved more, and I've found it so tough to do that on the public land. One, I can't have stands set up, and two, honestly, I want my kids to be safe. So I'm really excited about these opportunities I've got coming up here. And, if I get the opportunity to manage this land as well, putting some of this knowledge that we're going to gain to use.
You know what I'm excited about, Mike?
What's that?
You just said you had 1,000 acres, and I'm taking it that's in Florida, right?
That is in Florida.
Let me ask you this. Do you know...
It's not finalized yet.
Well, just in case, do you know if there are any Osceola turkeys running around on this 1,000-acre piece of prime land?
You know what? I think there are a ton of turkey, but I think they're Easterns. Okay. I think it's above. Yeah, I think it's above the line. That's something I want to get more into is turkey hunting. And to be honest, this is the way it is. By the time deer season's over, my wife, who has been watching 4 kids by herself on weekends and during weeks when I go scouting or whatever, the closest property to me is over an hour away. So if I'm doing something deer related, it's very time consuming. So usually by the time deer season's over, she's about had enough. So I'm trying to get into turkey hunting, but I'm also trying to maintain a healthy marriage and home life. As much as I love hunting, I do love my wife and family more, and that's more important to me. So turkey's taken a little bit of a back burner, but as my kids get a little bit older, and especially I can get them involved more, that's definitely something I want to get more into.
Well, I know a guy with a vest full of, I don't know how many $100 worth of turkey calls and a really slick camera that would love to come down to Florida and do nothing but video turkeys come down to your gun barrel. And your kids. It can be a family affair. You bring your wife, man. I'll get you a big old blind. This will be great. So
we'll start planning this out. And you know what? Your wife might want a trip to Florida.
Man, this is materializing. I think we need to get our wives together, and you can start turkey hunting.
On the air. Right, yeah. Well, I guess we better go ahead and get Lindsay on the line. I'm excited about what we have to talk about with him.
Let's do it.
All right, on the line we have Lindsay Thomas Jr. from the QDMA. He is the QDMA Communications Director, and he's been there since 2003. Lindsay, can you just tell us a little bit more about your history and your job?
Yeah, Mike, I am Director of Communications at QDMA, the Quality Deer Management Association, and my primary role doing that is as editor of Quality Whitetails magazine, which is the magazine we send out to QDMA members. And I also edit QDMA.com, the website, and along with Brian Grossman, who is my communications manager, we handle the website, social media, email marketing or email newsletters rather for QDMA, and the magazine. So those are, I'm overall communications for QDMA.
Lindsay, we're really excited to have you on the podcast. We, when Adam and I first started talking about doing this, you were, I think, one of the first couple names to come up. I just joined the QDMA this year, and I'm a huge fan of the Quality Whitetails magazine. It jumped to my top magazine to read as soon as I started getting it. It's really well put together.
Thank you, Mike. That's great. I appreciate your support. Appreciate you joining. But yeah, I'm honored to be here with you guys.
Long overdue, right?
Yeah.
So when we first talked about what we could talk about and some of the stuff that you had experience with, you brought up the Southeast Deer Study Group meeting that you just came back from. I was really interested to hear some of the information and studies you heard about. So maybe you could just start out telling us a couple highlights, and then we can dig deeper into some of the topics they covered.
Okay, yeah. Just to give your listeners a little context here, what the Southeast Deer Study Group meeting is. It's an annual gathering. It's been going on for, I think, more than 30 years, maybe approaching 40. But it's an annual gathering of deer researchers, mostly from universities, though some from state agencies, federal agencies, and it's from the Southeast mostly. The meeting itself rotates around the Southeast state to state. There's a different state agency as the host each year. But it's not just limited to the Southeast. Researchers from other parts of the country come to this as well, because this is the biggest of the regional deer research meetings that are held annually. So it's kind of the one that everybody, knows the most about, and so it attracts folks from other parts of the country as well. But largely the Southeast is the schools and participants that will be involved. But they come together each year and share with each other updates on their deer research and what they're learning. It is a 2-day barrage of PowerPoint presentations. Literally, these folks get up there and each one talks for 15 minutes. And it goes all day long. I think the total is 36 some odd PowerPoint presentations that I will see and the audience will see in 2 days. So it's it's brutal in terms of PowerPoint, but for a deer hunter, you can hang in there because some of this stuff is extremely interesting to any deer hunter, and that's why QDMA is there to cover it and to report to our members what we've learned. That really is a key part of what QDMA is about, is taking the science of deer behavior, deer biology, and deer management and bringing that to everyday deer hunters so that they can apply the best of that information to their hunting to improve their deer populations and improve their hunting. And that's really the role QDMA has fixed for itself, is serving as that conduit between the scientific community and deer hunters. And that's why we go to this meeting. So there's sort of what this is.
And that sounds like the ultimate 2-day deer geek fest. I mean, sounds like, Adam, we might need to do a remote podcast from there next year or something. I mean, the science of everything sounds really interesting.
It is. Now, it's taken, I'll be honest with you, these guys and girls don't come there to talk to laymen like me and you. They're talking to each other, and so it's in the language of science. It's not a public convention or something. It's just literally the scientific community getting together and talking to each other. So I'll be honest with you, over the years, I have had to learn, it's almost like learning a second language, how to interpret a lot of the scientific jargon that they use when they're giving their presentations. It's a lot about statistics and, scientific words, college words that, some of them I didn't know when I first started coming there, and some of them I still don't know. But you kind of learn to interpret and read between the lines as a deer hunter sitting there. And again, that's kind of why I'm there, is to listen to these scientists talk and, boil it down to the message for the everyday deer hunter who hasn't been going to this meeting and learned, to interpret or understand this language.
It sounds like maybe we'll just have you back on the podcast to translate for us then.
That's probably the best idea.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. I'll be glad to do this annually.
We're already planning our next year of podcasting on episode number 2. So
that works. We'll do it right after.
We're off to a good start.
And I'm locking myself into another invite. So this is working.
Yeah.
But, I've said in other places and other times what this is like. And a lot of times, many of the studies you'll hear about are repeated, or not repeated, but rather redundant from studies you've heard before. Different schools or different researchers looking at issues that have been looked at before, like coyotes and fawn predation, or buck movement, or diseases, or whatever that might be. And you've heard talks on these topics before. But the thing for deer hunters to understand about why these universities and deer researchers repeat studies in certain on certain topics is, it's just like you dialing your rifle, sighting your rifle in at the range. You're not going to shoot one time and go home thinking you know where your gun is shooting. You're going to put a bunch of bullets on paper and see where you're grouping. And that's how you fine-tune your scope and get dialed in. Same thing with science. These researchers are going to repeat studies that their peers have done, looking at, say, for example, coyote predation. They might try studying coyote predation in a different region or under different circumstances than someone else has looked at it. And that's how they put bullets on paper and get dialed in and get a good group and get a feel for what really is going on with coyotes or diseases or whatever it might be. So, there's kind of the thing to understand about science is, it is repetitive because they are looking for patterns and confidence, to increase their confidence level in their findings. You don't go out there and do one study and come home and say, well, coyotes and deer interact this way, because you don't know yet. It takes a lot of studies and a lot of research to determine those relationships and how they might change in different regions or under different circumstances. So it really is kind of fun to be a part of this and see it work, see the science of this work. And it really has been enjoyable for me.
Coyotes have been a hot topic in the South for a little while now, which obviously you're well aware of. Maybe we could start with that. Did you hear any interesting studies or information regarding coyote?
Yeah, there was a good study presented there by a student at the University of Missouri named Summer Higdon. And what Summer was doing was she was monitoring deer with trail cameras. And there, it's kind of neat. What you'll find is a lot of these scientists, though they might be using GPS collars, equipment that you and I can't use, some of them also just do studies using tools you and I can use. And in this case, a trail camera. And actually, getting some sound scientific findings with this stuff. But anyway, she ran trail cameras at 40 different sites in the highlands of North Carolina, the Roan Highlands. And actually, she was pretty close to the Appalachian Trails, what I understand. But anyway, ran a whole bunch of trail cameras for an entire summer, 40 sites. And then she went back and studied what she saw does with fawns doing. And she also studied coyote activity in those photographs, thousands of photographs that she got, on her trail cameras. And what she saw was that the peak activity time each day for does with fawns was middle of the day. I mean, dead noon. That was their peak activity of does with fawns, which was interesting because it was the complete opposite of coyote activity. Coyotes were, much like other deer, active most at dawn and dusk. They had two peaks during the day, dawn and dusk, and their activities were lower throughout the rest of the day. So what was going on, what seems obvious when you look at the chart of the two activity patterns is does with fawns were moving when coyotes were moving least. They clearly, it appeared the does knew when to be out and about with their fawns to avoid that predator. And the other interesting thing that Summer saw was does in her cameras that did not have fawns accompanying them were moving normally like other deer at dawn and dusk along with the coyotes. So I think, it's clear here that these does that have fawns accompanying them are, perceiving when the threat level is highest for their fawns and moving at times when that threat level is lowest, which kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of what we've learned about general deer behavior regarding danger. And specifically us, hunters. We know that all deer have the capability to perceive when they're in most danger, whether that's a time of day or a location, and adjust their movements, whether, again, time-related or location-related, to avoid you or avoid a predator or avoid whatever danger that might be. So, neat study here just looking at does and fawns, but again, broader applications for hunters and driving home that old lesson about don't be predictable in your hunting patterns because deer will quickly figure that out and move when you don't.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess I'm going to get off into the weeds already here. That makes me wonder, with coyotes, it seems like their population growth in the South has grown quite a bit over the last, I don't know, you probably give me a better idea, but I would say 15 to 20 years. And I know in South Carolina, there's been some studies. I've heard Grant Woods talk about them, about one, does adapting where they're having their fawns, but also how much the coyotes were having an effect on the fawn survival rate. Do you think it's something maybe where the deer need some time to adapt to having the coyotes around, and it might kind of level off where their survival rate's going to be a little bit better as time goes on?
I don't know, Mike. That'd be speculation on my part. But we do know for right now that coyotes in some areas are having a very significant impact on fawn recruitment. They're taking a bunch of fawns. And in some areas, if that is being compounded on top of a heavy doe harvest by hunters, you can quickly drop the population when that's happening. If you're hitting the does pretty hard because, maybe you need to, but maybe the deer density has been traditionally high and you need to drop deer density where you're hunting to bring it into balance with the habitat. So you're shooting does, but then at the same time, coyotes have suddenly surged in the area and are, taking a high percentage of fawns. that population is going to get down there pretty quick. And in that case, what QDMA teaches hunters to do is be responsive to that and stop, drop back on your doe harvest, maybe even stop doe harvest to allow the population to respond. But if those coyotes are really working the fawns over, it may take a while for it to respond. We know they're having that impact. They're not having that impact necessarily everywhere. And so it's important for hunters wherever you are to measure fawn recruitment. And there's some easy ways to do that. We teach that at QDMA.com. And measure fawn recruitment where you are. See how many are surviving to enter the fall population, and be responsive to that. And maybe have some predator management. So we know they're an issue. We know they're a problem in some areas. Where it goes from here, that's tough to say. I haven't seen anyone really do any good science on that to suggest what the long-term situation might be. So, but coyotes are here to stay. There's no doubt about that. They are so adaptable. They can adapt to almost any environment. I mean, we know now you've got them in suburban and even urban areas now, and they're doing just fine eating out of dumpsters. So if it's got a calorie in it, a coyote will find it and survive on it. And so they're here to stay. We're not going to eradicate them. And it's more a matter of learning to manage deer in the presence of coyotes, to measure the effect of them on your fawn recruitment, and to react in appropriate ways when you see that, your fawn survival is low, whether that is, back off on your doe harvest, increase habitat quality. In other words, encourage young forest and early successional cover so you have more places for those fawns to hide from coyotes. And of course, manage the coyote numbers. You're not going to get rid of them, but some science has shown if you go out there, say right now, it's May, and if your state regulations allow you to trap during this time of year, which many states do for coyotes, get out there and trap them, or if you can't do it yourself, bring in a professional trapper who will in short order put a dent in the local coyotes. And if you will do that right now, before fawns hit the dirt, that can be an effective way to get fawns past coyotes each year, because a fawn is most vulnerable to a coyote for about the first 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks of its life. That's when most of them are going to get whacked if they're going to get hit by a coyote. So if you can drop your local coyote numbers right now, you are really helping some fawns get through. And yes, within a year, your coyote numbers are going to fill in. They're going to be right back where they were. But again, it's like you're opening up a temporary window at the right time of year to get fawns through that gauntlet. So there's methods for managing that problem when you have it, but you have to determine, do you have it?
Are you aware of any studies that have been done on the impact of coyotes and their annual kill rate per year of deer? Is there any studies that's been done like that?
Yeah, a number of them, a pile of them, in different areas, in looking at different aspects of that. Some of the rates of fawn predation and loss to coyotes have been astounding, super high percentages. In other areas, though, similar studies have found little to no predation by coyotes, even in areas where there are coyotes living with these deer. So that's the problem we found, is it's variable. And they really haven't figured out exactly what the combination of factors is that leads some areas to have a problem with this and others not necessarily. So, you can't assume that because you see a coyote that you have a fawn recruitment problem. 1 + 1 there does not equal 2. You have to determine, through measuring your actual fawn recruitment, whether your fawn recruitment is, moderate, high to low, and then begin to determine that, coyotes might be the problem. But yeah, several studies have found fairly significant. I know, you mentioned some in South Carolina and some throughout the Southeast that have found really high rates. And then a number of them, there was a good one done a few years ago in Alabama, found super high fawn recruitment rates. Population and fawn recruitment was really dropping off. And they did what I just told you, brought in professional trappers in the spring, just before the fawn drop, put a dent in the coyote numbers, and fawn recruitment bounced right back. So yes, coyotes have an impact. Now, in terms of adult numbers, adult deer, that's a pretty rare thing. Yes, a coyote will take an adult deer from time to time, but in general, that's not a problem you usually need to worry about. Because you see a coyote take an adult deer does not necessarily mean, and usually doesn't mean, that they're taking several adult deer or taking a significant number of adult deer. That rarely happens. Fawns is where coyotes have their greatest impact on you and your deer population.
Do you have an opinion on guys? I hear guys talk a lot about during the hunting season trying to take out a coyote here and there. Do you have an opinion whether that has a positive or negative effect one way or the other? I've kind of heard conflicting reports on that as well.
Yeah, it does not have an effect. This has been looked at. You certainly feel good, and I'm not going to tell you pass the coyote. Certainly shoot the coyote. I mean, I'm going to do that too. But don't fool yourself into thinking that shooting a coyote from your deer stand in fall has any effect on fawn recruitment the next spring. It does not. This has been shown. And the problem is that's entirely random, that you were sitting in a deer stand and a coyote happened by and you shot it. That is not having a measurable impact on the coyote population. You just shot a random coyote that passed through. And the other factor here is coyotes' dynamics, their own population dynamics, is so churned out there and constantly mixing up and moving. And you got coyotes that are resident coyotes in a small area. You got coyotes that are transient that cover incredible areas. And you just don't ever know which one you're seeing there. But more importantly, when you create a vacuum, if you get lucky, say, and kill, say, a couple of the local resident coyotes, maybe a dominant pair or something like that, that vacuum is not going to stay empty for very long. It's going to fill in very quickly because coyotes are constantly on the move, covering ground, looking for spaces where there's coyote food that they can fill in. And it just happens so quick. Some of the studies have shown, like I said, within a year, even when you bring in the really only effective method, which is serious trapping by someone who knows what they're doing, when you come in with professional trapping and knock a serious dent in the population in a broad area, within a year, that won't be noticeable anymore. Again, do it. Don't let it go. But don't fool yourself into thinking you're protecting fawns by doing that.
How can I really keep up with the deer numbers on my particular property? What's the best way to do it? Is like using a software program like Deer Lab, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, the number one way that is the tool that's in your power is what's called a trail camera survey. And this is not just randomly monitoring deer on your property with your trail cameras. This is a method worked out through science where you go out there and you put a camera per 100 acres, and you run that survey for 14 days just prior to deer season coming in. The goal there is you want to be running that survey after velvet has come off the antlers, but before acorns start dropping, because you need a bait like corn to get them in front of those cameras. You put the cameras out there, like I said, at a density of a camera per 100 acres, scattered evenly across the property. You run that for 14 days, and then you count deer in photos. And there are some formulas, fairly simple formulas you use with the numbers you gather that feed you information like deer per square mile, like does per buck, and also your fawn recruitment and sex ratio as well. Now, it's a little more complicated than what I just told you, and we've got resources on QDMA.com to teach you how to do a trail camera survey and a computation form where you just plug in your numbers and it spits out the calculations I mentioned. But that's the single best way to get a good estimate on your deer per square mile. Now, it's not going to be 1 year is not going to give you a precise measurement of deer per square mile. What you're going for is you want trends. You want to do this 2 years, 3 years, 4 years in a row. And then the trend value of where those figures are going is really what's more important than the snapshot data. So you can look at your results from that trail camera survey and see how is your fawn recruitment trending? How is your density trending? But then you want to combine that with some other things. And I like to look at the habitat. Get out and walk your property. And if you don't know some of the preferred forages where you hunt, call your state wildlife agency and talk to the nearest wildlife biologist, get them to help you with that, or talk to someone who does know. Go for a walk in the woods and look at the preferred forages where you hunt, across the season. And if you're seeing plenty of good forage, some of the highly preferred stuff you see out there in the South is, honeysuckle, both the native and the non-native varieties, greenbrier, things like that. And if you are not finding those, or you're finding them, but the only place you find them is above your neck, growing up tree saplings. In other words, any leaf from your neck down has been browsed by deer. That's a sign that you don't have enough food for the deer using that property at some point during the season. Maybe all year, maybe only in summer, maybe only in winter. It just depends. You have to monitor that and see. But that's really the balance you're going for there. You don't want deer to ever be, short of adequate food out there for the number of deer on the property. And that's really what QDM is about, is putting the right number of deer out there for the food available. Now, it doesn't just mean shoot does if they don't have enough food. You can also increase the food amount. You can improve the habitat by planting food plots and, opening up some daylight and putting that on the ground and encouraging these natural forages I'm talking about and more of the native plants that they browse on. So it's more than just dropping numbers of deer if you need to do this. You should be increasing the habitat quality at the same time, because that actually bumps up the number of deer you can support in healthy condition. So, yeah, it's a complex thing to determine, but you want to do it with several things. A good trail camera survey will help you. Looking at the habitat will help you. And you can even, if you will just track your observations when you're sitting in the deer stand each year, writing down literally every time you come in from the woods, write down how many hours were you in the stand and what did you see. Sort that into fawns, adult does, and antlered bucks. And at the end of the season, tally it all up. How many does did you see per hour? How many fawns did you see per hour? How many bucks did you see per hour at the end of the season? And then another good one is, how many fawns did you see per doe? And those numbers, you can, again, track those across the season. If you don't have enough trail cameras or time to do a trail camera survey, collecting your observation data and looking at that across seasons gives you the same information. It'll show you, is your deer population trending up, trending down? Are you seeing, more bucks or fewer bucks in fawn recruitment? Are you, getting more fawns in the fall population, or is that number dropping? So collecting a little data, whether it's habitat data or observation data or trail camera data, that's what you need really to put your finger on, deer density and habitat quality and finding the balance between those. Now, it's not something that, you do a one-time fix and it stays fixed. It's always in flux. Even if you don't, harvest any deer populations and habitat quality are always in flux. So you're always chasing a balance point that's not going to stay balanced for long. But, you can keep it pretty well balanced and maximize your hunting enjoyment and the health of the population through doing those things.
I had a hard time articulating that question, but you just gave an outstanding answer on really the scientific approach that I was really trying to trying to get out of you, hopefully, and you nailed it. So I really appreciate that, Lindsay. I know that'll help me and probably a lot of hunters throughout the Southeast to do that.
It's me interested in trying to study this year.
It is, and it's so easy, guys. It's so easy if you'll just take the time when you come in from the woods to record hours you hunted and deer you saw. That's it. And the more data, if you got several people hunting with you in an area, make them all do this. And it's so simple. And that is great data. To know at the end of the season how many bucks you saw per hour, how many does you saw per hour, and then compare that to the next season. That really quickly gets you dialed in on your hunting success, your population dynamics, and get you moving down the road real quick, and can convince people. If you got folks you're hunting with who are like, I don't know about this QDM thing, this doesn't work. Those kind of data and trail camera photos, as of course, too, can quickly convince people that, no, look, guys, we're seeing, so many more bucks per hour than we saw last season. Because hunters, and I'm this way too, we're bad about this, and it, we tend to focus on the anecdotes. You go out there and you have a bad morning, and all of a sudden it means it's a bad season. You have a bad afternoon, and it means the whole deer population is in terrible shape.
Neighbors shot them all.
Yeah. We all had a tendency to let negative experiences make us, expand those and think that it has a greater significance. But many times you'll come out of a season going, man, this season sucked. And then you look at your data and like, well, dang, wait, look, we saw more mature bucks this year per hour than we did last year. So these data can really help you.
Last season really sucked.
I'm embarrassed because I'll track every single turkey that I have on the farm, and I'll journal it. I'll journal it down to, when I was hearing the gobbling, what gobblers I've seen during that particular hunt, so I'll know exactly what my flock looks like. And then I don't understand why I haven't really applied that to my deer hunting yet. So shame on me, but you gave me some juice there that I'm going to do that from now on.
And listen, guys, again, this is what QDMA is here for. Go to QDMA.com and encourage your listeners too, because, we teach this stuff. We teach how to do trail camera surveys. We teach what to do with your observation data. We teach how to pull jawbones and how to age them. Age is a huge cornerstone of quality deer management when it comes to not only your bucks, but your does. When you get into aging deer and learning that just adds a whole new dimension to it. So we teach this stuff. That's what we're here for.
Lindsay, do you have members that have benefited from, let's say you only have 10 or 20 or 40 acres. Do you have guys that are doing these type of surveys on smaller properties and able to keep good records over time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it can be, on small property. Now, the thing about small property, you certainly can collect good data and get a real good idea of the deer herd in your area, and sort of that'll be extrapolated out to a broader area than just the small property you're hunting. But now your ability to manage that population on properties around you. If density is high and you need to be shooting some does, and you're on 40 acres and you're the only one who's shooting does and nobody else is, you're not going to be able to move the needle across the region. That's where cooperatives come in, and getting involved with your neighbors and meeting them and expanding that out, which, there's a whole other ball of wax we can get into as cooperatives. So, yeah, you start down the road talking about deer research and QDM, and man, you just, so many rabbit holes we can run down here to talk about. But so, yes, you can collect that kind of data on small property. I mean, I love small property management because it is micromanagement. It is, understanding, down to the square yard, what's going on your place and the deer that use it. And yeah, that can be really fun.
You spoke to the training that QDMA offers, and I'm very interested in the deer steward courses that you offer, both online and in person. And so I guess this is probably a really good chance to do your sales pitch on me and some of our listeners as well.
Well, yeah, you just gave me the pitch. It's kind of like, your deer hunting 101 or 102 rather, the advanced degree in deer management. And we created this course to take our members who practice this stuff, do what we teach them, do all of this, but really want to learn a little bit more. That's what that came out of. So yeah, the Deer Steward Level 1 is mostly in a classroom, whether you do that in person with going and being with Kip Adams and Matt Ross and Joe Hamilton and our other staff members, wildlife biologist staff who teach that, Craig Harper from the University of Tennessee and many others who participate in those courses. And the great thing about the in-person one is, you spend the weekend with these folks, not just in the classroom, but, at dinner and around the fire pot at night and having a beer and whatever. And you can really pick these guys' brains and just learn so much. It's a very fun experience. You get to know these people personally. Now, the online course is, certainly more convenient because you can do it from your home. It's cheaper. You don't have to travel. There's a lot more opportunities there. But then if you do the Level 1 online, we still offer the Level 2 in person, only in person. We don't have a Level 2 online. And the difference between Level 1 and Level 2 is pretty much all hands-on. You're outside. You are, working with food plot equipment, working with jawbones and, all of those kinds of things and really getting your hands dirty in food plots for the 2 days. So it's a super intensive deer management education for those who really want to get, down into the nitty gritty. So yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that, and you should do it. It's, we'd be happy. Matt Ross runs that program for us, and he maintains feedback we make all the folks that graduate from this fill out a form and giving us feedback on the course when they're done. And talk to anyone who has done this. You will be hard pressed, if it's even possible, to find someone who's been through this course who will tell you, yeah, that wasn't worth the money. We get high praise from the folks that do this.
What is the cost for the Level 1 online? Is that a standard cost every time?
Yeah, you may have to go to QDMA.com, one of you, and look it up. But it's, I want to say it's about $200. Yeah, all right, there you go, $175, and there's a little discount there if you're already a QDMA member. And it is, you can take your own time with it. It's many hours of presentations. You're actually watching a recorded deer steward course. All of these speakers giving their presentations on these various topics. So you can do it at your own pace and then take the test and pass. And then again, the in-person courses are a little more pricey because we feed you, we house you. Many of these courses involve field trips, like we have been, to Lee and Tiffany's farm. This year we're going to the Heartland Bow Hunter Farm to visit as a field trip for one of the deer steward classes. We've been to Grant Woods Place in Missouri. Many of these kind of side trips to some really cool properties at the same time that you are learning this information. We get outside and get in the dirt and look at it and get to visit some neat places too. So that's why the price on the in-person one is a little bit higher.
Hey, Lindsay, you know in the South that leases are real big. Would you see that as a benefit maybe for somebody that's a president of a hunting club or just has a lease as opposed to owning their own property?
What, the deer steward class?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. So much of this has to do with, things that you can do on a lease, whether, particularly with the herd management aspects, measuring buck to doe ratios and aging bucks, moving more bucks into mature age classes, learning how to protect those yearlings so that you get more bucks in your older groups and get more scrapes and rubs and have more fun rattling deer in and all of those things. I mean, you don't have to own the property to do that. You don't have to own the property to pull jawbones. And you certainly don't have to own the property. Many people who have leases, as you and I, we all know, can do food plots, whether it is on woods roads or logging decks or whatever that might be. So, the food plot knowledge is there. Not owning the land basically rules out a couple of things like maybe prescribed fire if the landowner won't let you do that, and certainly determining what timber gets cut. But beyond that, you can do a lot on property that you don't own, even from a habitat management standpoint. And they definitely go into that.
This article you wrote on the study group has so much good stuff in it. There's a couple things I wanted to get back to. I wanted to ask you about the study where the guy sent in deer jawbones to a lab to get those tested.
Yeah.
And actually, it was really surprising how inaccurate that test was. Maybe tell us about that, and then maybe kind of give us your opinion as how important that is.
Yeah. So Abe Woodard, who is the wildlife biologist at a large Florida private property. This is a really big cattle ranch in Florida, but they have hunting leases on the property, and Abe Woodard oversees all of this. And Abe's given presentations before. They've really got a pretty advanced deer management effort on this property and have done amazing things. People think Florida is, you can't have good deer in Florida, but they have done amazing things with producing a lot of 4.5, 5.5, and older bucks and some great deer. But he, as a little side study, what he did, he's got access to all these deer that are harvested on this big property, and the data and the jawbones. Well, he pulled 99 pairs of incisor teeth. Now, what we're talking about here is the cementum annuli technique. Now, this is not, looking at the jawbone and aging by tooth wear. This is where you send off an incisor tooth, which those are the very front teeth that they pinch off food with on the bottom jaw. Sending 2 of those off to a lab that cuts them, slices into them, and analyzes them under a microscope and counts the cementum rings and estimates age that way. So what he did was, which that method is supposed to be more accurate for older deer than aging by tooth wear. So he took 99 bucks. He pulled a pair of incisors from each buck and sent them separately to the same aging lab, but he didn't tell them they were each from the same buck. So you follow me? So
yes.
The lab thought they had
198.
190. Thank you. I majored in journalism.
Yeah.
198 teeth. They thought there was 198 deer. Well, so when he got back the results, 15 out of 99 pairs, the lab gave the same age estimate.
That's crazy.
50 of the pairs were aged differently, but within 1 year apart. And 34, so about 34%, varied by more than 1 year. And so that's about a third of them were different, years for the same buck, but more than a year apart. Now, the thing to remember about this, and this is what Abe pointed out, this method that's, counting these cementum annuli rings, those cementum layers are laid down in the teeth during stress periods, during nutritional stress periods, particularly winter. So what they find is that those cementum rings are darkest and most notable in the north and in areas with tougher winter climates. So there you have it. In Florida, for whitetails in North America, there is no other deer like those in Florida that enjoys warm year-round weather. You don't have a deep period of winter stress or cold in Florida for these deer. So they just are not laying down cementum rings as dark or as distinct as deer in the north. And that explains why this lab had so much trouble, putting these deer ages together with any accuracy. So yeah, it does point out that in the deep south, that cementum annuli technique probably is suspect.
So how does that compare to the tooth? Would tooth wear be similar then? Because you're basically looking at what they're analyzing, or is that a different?
Tooth wear is different. Tooth wear is looking at literally the amount of wear on the back molars. Now, the way I'm a big fan of judging by tooth replacement and wear. Now, you'll hear people disparage it and say, well, that's not accurate. That is not the whole story, and it's not true. The first thing you do when looking at a deer jawbone is look at the replacement patterns. Deer replace their teeth at young ages just like people do. You know, you came into this world with temporary teeth and lost them all and got some permanent teeth. Well, deer do the same thing, and you can look at those patterns and immediately put any deer jawbone with 100% accuracy into three groups. That would be fawns, 1.5-year-olds or yearlings, and all deer 2.5 plus. Now that's immediate with 100% accuracy. Sort all jawbones into those three groups just by looking at the tooth replacement patterns. Now, after that, you take all your jawbones that are 2.5 plus, and that's when you start looking at the wear patterns on the back molars, how those teeth are worn down. Now, it gets basically the thing to remember is the accuracy at determining each age class drops lower and lower the older the deer is. But you can still fairly accurately sort those deer into 2.5-year-olds, and then we usually encourage people to bracket them at about 3 to 4, and then 5.5 plus. You would never pick up a deer jawbone and say, well, I think he's 11.5. No, you don't dial into the year like that for those older deer. You look at the groups, but think about what I just told you. To identify fawns, yearlings, 2.5-year-olds, and then bracket 3s and 4s together, and then all deer 5.5 plus, that's a ton of information right there to help you manage your deer herd. You can do a lot with that information. You don't need to know whether he's 6 or 7. That doesn't matter. If you find a deer that's 5.5 plus, good on you, particularly if it's a buck. Very few bucks make it to 5.5 plus. It doesn't matter if he's 11 or 17. The fact is he's, fully physically mature, and you should celebrate.
That's really interesting. So all these guys that are telling me they're taxidermists told me their deer, my deer was at least 14 years old, the oldest deer he's ever seen. Maybe isn't that might be a little bit of a hunter's tale, huh?
Well, now it depends. Now you show me a jawbone where not only are the molars and the dentine really super exposed, but the things are dished out and worn down smooth, and they don't even really have crests on them anymore. Yeah, you can't look at that and say 14, but you can certainly say he was a teenager. And that's where you would want to send that incisor off to a lab and maybe get some more information to go with that. Basically, though, the science has shown the tooth replacement and wear technique is most accurate out to 3.5 years old, and the cementum annuli technique is more accurate from 3.5 plus. So if you want to know whether your buck was 5 or 6, that's when you send an incisor to the cementum lab. If you want to know whether he was 1 or 2, you just have to look at the tooth replacement and wear patterns.
Do you have a lab that you prefer to send your jawbones off to?
No, I don't. There are two primary ones in the United States, and one's in Texas, and one is Matson's lab. I forget where they're located, but I don't really know a difference between the two. But it can be fairly expensive to do that. You generally batch them up. You get a price break for how many teeth you send in, and a lot of times people will pool those together and get together with their neighbors and send a batch to the lab and save a little money.
It's interesting.
It seems that almost has created a new trophy class of instead of a 10-point buck, you want to send your tooth to the lab. Instead of getting B and C scored, you want to send it to the lab and find out how old it was.
Oh, and see, I love that. I am so excited that hunters today talk more about age, or just as much about age as they do about score. There was a day when, you would just hear, what does he score? And more today, people realize the importance of age. Because, that is such a basic and important fact about QDM. Antlers don't really tell you age. You can have a very young deer with great antlers, and you can have a very old deer with very poor antlers. It's age that counts. And to me, that's so critical because, as a hunter, I really want to pursue a mature buck. And I don't care if he's below average antlers. If I pull that jawbone and I see that he's 5 plus, and maybe even 6, 7, 8, somewhere out in there, man, that's that is a huge achievement to me and to any hunter. I don't care if he scores 80 inches, because so few deer make it to that age, and they don't get to that age being stupid. So for you to kill him, that is a heck of an achievement.
I want to ask you about this is the one thing in the article that really interested me the most. There was a study where let's see, Michael Biggerstaff, he looked at the peak activity on his trail cameras of bucks 2.5 and older, and relating that to the rut. Can you tell us about that? I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, really, in a neat study. I'm glad you pulled that one out. Basically, he looked at across an entire season. He counted out when he was seeing does, adult does, when he was seeing yearling bucks, and when he was seeing all bucks 2.5 plus. And he related that to, for this site where he did this study, they had good breeding data, and of course they got that by backdating fetuses from late season harvested does. They know where their peak of breeding is at that location. They know exactly when the peak of conceptions are when bucks are breeding does at that location. Well, he looked at his patterns of deer appearing in trail cameras compared to that peak of conceptions. And what he saw was yearling bucks appeared consistently in his cameras across the entire season without really any fluctuation. And the same thing for adult does. But his bucks, 2.5 plus, peaked in appearances in his cameras right, in alignment with peaks in conception. Basically meaning you can look at appearances by 2.5-year-old bucks in your trail cameras across the season and chart it out, and that will show you roughly when your peak of breeding is. So if you're rolling along and you're seeing yearling bucks and does and maybe a 2.5 or 3 here and there, and then all of a sudden whatever week or month it is where you hunt that is the peak of the rut, all of a sudden you start seeing, boom, 1 week a whole pile of 3s, 4s, and older deer showing up at those scrapes for maybe a 2-week period, and then it dries back down. Well, there you go. That's the peak of what's going on is they're moving because that's the peak of conceptions happening right then. Basically, it just, as hunters, we want to look at what we see in the woods. Well, I heard a grunt today or I saw a buck chase a doe and think, well, does that mean it's the peak of the rut? No, not necessarily. A lot of these behaviors spread out over a much longer period of time. But what Michael's study showed was all you got to do is if you run your trail cameras, say over scrapes, like a lot of us do, and you do it for an extended period of time, pre-rut, rut peak, and post-rut, you can look at your appearances of those adult bucks by day and see when the peak is and pretty much assume that was also the peak of your breeding.
Is that so? I see that was unbaited. Is that how he ran most of his cameras, was over scrapes?
Yes. Okay. I think now he said it was passive monitoring. So it may have been trails, it may have been food plots, and I think scrapes as well. But it was not baited like you would do in a preseason trail camera survey. So yeah, basically what he's trying to do there is get an unbiased sample of deer, individual deer movement, on that property. Unbiased meaning, when you put corn out, you might be attracting certain deer over certain others. You might be attracting more bucks than does or more does than bucks, and you're biasing the sample of what appears out there. By putting your cameras in random locations or, if you put it over a scrape, what's the bias there?
Yeah, you're going to get a lot more bucks, I would think.
A lot more bucks, that's right. You're getting a biased sample of the population. So what he's doing is doing more passive surveys in areas, trails, and whatnot, where he's trying to literally see all the deer out there.
Man, I that seems so helpful to me because I hunt a lot of public land here in Florida, and the rut dates vary so much. So I'm hopping around different areas in the state. And a lot of times, you have to put in for quota hunts ahead of time. So you want to know what's the best hunt that you want to put in for. What dates do you want to be out there and hunt? And it's so hard to tell. The state does the best they can as far as putting peak rut dates out. But the problem is some places you could go across a highway and the rut might be a couple months off. So it's a real challenge to figure out when the exact rut dates are. So if you can run cameras in a public area or even private or whatever for a couple of years, it seems incredibly helpful to be able to tell exactly when that is. I hunt a national forest, and the state put out a certain date, And when I talk to the locals, I'm not from that area, but I hunt there quite a bit. They tell me it's like a whole month different than what the state is. But I can tell after reading the study, I really am going to go back and believe what the state's telling me it is versus these guys that hunt it all the time. Either they're just straight lying to me because they don't want me to know.
Likely.
Or they might have no idea, and most of these guys I talk to run dogs, and they're not hunting during archery or muzzleloader when I think probably the peak rut is going on in that area. So, maybe they're seeing a lot more does than bucks. So maybe they're seeing some type of secondary activity or something, but that's really exciting to me.
Hunter observations can be pretty unreliable when it comes to pinning down the peak of the rut. Hunters we all tend to think, oh, well, it was different than this year than last year. And the science year in and year out shows in any given location, your peak of breeding is pretty much going to happen at the same time every year, regardless of what the weather was doing or the moon was doing or, whether you had vacation or not. I mean, it's pretty consistent. And when your state agency is telling you that, they're probably basing that, or they should be anyway, basing that on, again, what I mentioned, fetal data. This is measurements of fetuses taken from late season harvested does. You can measure that fetus and from the length backdate it to determine the day it would have been conceived. So that is really the most reliable way to determine when your peak of breeding is. And the state agency is probably getting their information there when they tell you that. Because they're running check stations and they're up there, pulling, helping, standing by when people are skinning deer, and they're gathering those fetuses and measuring those and collecting that data. And this is something any hunter can do if they have a late season harvest opportunity, and get a few does late season when those fetuses would be large enough to measure.
This kind of brings up as a secondary question to me because I thought of, a lot of guys believe in a lockdown period during the rut. And according to what he's saying is during the peak when most of these does would be being bred, and maybe it's only accurate to within a couple weeks. So maybe there still could be some type of a lockdown, but it seems like he's saying they're most active when the most breeding would be occurring.
That's right. And then many, many other studies have shown that bucks, studies with bucks wearing GPS collars. This was a pretty low tech study just using trail cameras, but more tech savvy studies using GPS collars have found buck movements in general increase steadily throughout the peak of breeding and then decline afterwards. There's nobody's seen any lull. There's no lockdown phase when they quit moving. It is from the pre-rut through the rut, all these studies have shown a steady day to day, week to week increase in their daily movement rates through the peak of breeding and then a decline after that. It's a simple bell curve. There's no, lull or pause or halftime or anything else.
I really love hearing all this basically study-based information that kind of, might go counter to traditional beliefs or even maybe sometimes support it, but it's really cool to be able to put science to some of these questions.
Well, and it's, it's understandable. We all have what we feel like, our intuition tells us. And when you're sitting in the woods, certainly I've had days where you think, man, the deer aren't moving, and your intuition tells you, well, it's because of the weather or it's because of this or because of that. And, a few anecdotal observations like that, and you're convinced. And that's how we operate. We're not, one person can't really go out there and, collect the kind of data that these scientists collect to really, and what they do is, in doing these studies, is they control for factors you're not thinking about. You might say, well, I didn't see bucks today because, it's a lull. There's a lull I heard that there's an October lull, and that's why I didn't see a buck today. Well, there's a number of other reasons you maybe didn't see a buck today. Maybe you pressured that stand. Maybe that buck was using a different part of his home range that day. Maybe, whatever. And that's what science does, is it attempts to say, what other causes could there be? What other explanations could there be for what I observed? And can we rule those out before we go deciding we know which one it is?
Man, well, I really appreciate the time you've given us. I think we're coming up on time here. Adam, did you have any last questions or any other of the studies you wanted to ask about before we let Lindsay go?
I'm curious if QDMA has ever compiled any research on a county-by-county basis of when the rut times actually hit during that particular county. I'm thinking that probably most states keep up with that data, and it's probably out there, but I'm not sure if anyone's ever compiled that into one document or one cut sheet.
We haven't. Now, we do have a map that is on the website with a blog that I wrote about the crazy rut we have here in the South. And that map is based on some data that some researchers collected a few years back that kind of mapped out, generally the peaks across the Southeast. But now it's not county by county. The problem you run into is the variability in what states, how much data they collect. Because when you get down to the county level, over here in some county that has a WMA in it, where they have run check stations for years, they might have a pile of conception date data. But in the county next door, there's not a WMA. They might have had, maybe 5 fetuses collected over 10 years. That's not enough data. So you're going to run into all these holes where, and this would be in most cases, most counties, the state's not going to have that data. So they kind of map it out across bigger regions, looking, at the WMAs or public lands or wherever areas, DMAP properties where private landowners have collected data like this for them, and patch it together that way. But that's the problem. Some states are good at this and collect all this data across a broad area. Some aren't. And even within good states, there can be counties where they don't have much data. So it's unfortunately, tougher to do a true county by county scale on that. But like I said, this map that I mentioned on the QDMA site is really pretty good and for looking at the general timing across the Southeast.
I'll make sure we put a link to that in the show notes on downsouthhunting.com for the podcast.
Great, yeah. I forget the name of the blog, but it was the one I wrote about. Why is the rut so strange in the South? Why do we have January rut and February rut in Alabama and October and even August in Florida? So, but
can you give us I've read that article and I think it's really interesting. Can you give us a quick summary of that? And obviously, if somebody wants to read the whole thing, they can and check the website.
You're going to have to run me over into a part 2 podcast, aren't you?
I know. We're pushing time, but there's just so much interesting stuff to talk about. You're right.
And for having covered this meeting for years and worked for QDMA for years, yeah. I mean, I love this stuff, and I've collected so much of it from scientists, and it's just so cool to talk about. But anyway, real quick, let me just see if I can sum this up. Why deer breed at different times? If you go back before man's influence in terms of like wiping out deer populations and then restocking them, in general, the further south you go, the earlier deer will breed. Because, the bottom line is a deer population's goal with breeding is to put fawns on the dirt when forage is abundant. And that's going to be spring. Well, springtime and spring green up, it varies across the continent. Further north you go, the later spring is. The further south you go, the earlier it is. And so thus, generally the further south you go, the earlier deer breed because they're putting fawns on the ground. They need to put fawns on the ground earlier to be landing when forage is most abundant during spring green up. So the doe has, high quality milk and she can wean that fawn on high quality forage. That's what the whole timing of the rut is about. And when you get down into Central America near the equator, deer breed pretty much year round because they can, because there's no hard climate shift and no really spring. I mean, the forage is available pretty much year round, so it doesn't matter. Well, that's traditionally what you had. So as you move south, like into the if you look on the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic, coastal plain, like in Southeast Georgia, where I'm from, it's generally an October rut. You get into November, as you move up into the Piedmont of the South and then further north. But then go down into Florida and you get into September rut, and even if you get down into the Everglades, you're talking about August and even sometimes July, some breeding going on. Because, again, the seasons don't prevent them from doing that and successfully raising fawns. Well, then came, the wiping out of the deer herd in most of the country, and we did restocking, particularly in the Southeast. Well, in the Southeast, we brought in deer from all over the place, some from the north, but a pile from within state, a pile from, Mexico and Texas and anywhere we could get them. And in doing that, and this is what that article went into some of the science, the study they did from DNA to determine this, that in doing that, we moved some deer around that had that built-in seasonal trigger. It's triggered by the length of daylight. You'll hear people, there's an old wives' tale about it's the moon that determines the rut. Well, sorry, guys, that's BS. It is the time of day, the length of daylight.
Tell it like it is.
We like it. I would have spelled that word out for you, but I didn't know if this was a family podcast.
Yeah.
So, it is the length of daylight that triggers deer to begin breeding. Well, some deer were moved into areas and they had a built-in genetic trigger for a length of day that was now on a different day in the calendar. And so in Alabama, in Mississippi, in some of the Gulf Coast areas, you've got January timing, even February timing, some very late ruts, because wherever those deer came from, they brought with them a genetic day length trigger that triggered them to breed late. And because it was in the South, those fawns are born late, and it's okay. They'll be okay. The following winter is not going to be so harsh that it kills them because they're still relatively young and small. And so those deer continue to survive, and those genetics persist, and so we have a late rut.
I'll post a link to that article. Adam, you got any other last questions?
No, that covers it. I just want to say I really appreciate it, Lindsay. This has been an outstanding conversation, and a lot that I'm going to personally go back home and make notes and, planning next year's deer season out.
Well, guys, I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed talking to you. We didn't even get to most of the highlights of the Deer Study Group meeting.
I kind of thought that might happen, but
yeah.
Lindsay, but before you go, one last thing. Could you kind of give us the benefits of joining the QDMA, and also, as I understand it, it's not just a magazine that you get, but the money that you pay for actually goes towards helping deer management. Can you kind of give us an idea what that might involve?
Yeah, it's a lot of things, but certainly the educational aspect through the magazine, learning about this stuff that you and I have been talking about, learning how to be a better deer manager and how to have better deer hunting where you hunt, how to have more exciting hunting. We teach you how to do that, how to have healthier deer. But then as an organization, QDMA fights for deer hunters. We work at a policy level. We work to stop bad legislation for deer. We work to promote good legislation for deer. We work with state agencies to advance deer management and support them when they're fighting against initiatives that would be bad for deer hunting in those states. We work to take kids hunting. We work to advance hunter recruitment and ensure that we have a sustainable whitetail resource for the future of deer hunting. It's more than just, I want to have better deer hunting where I hunt. QDMA feels a responsibility to speak for the animal, to speak for the deer so that it goes beyond me and even my lifetime and the place that I hunt, so that there are always deer here for future hunters to have a quality population and to carry on those hunting traditions. That is tough to sum up, but that is what QDMA is about. We really feel like we are where deer hunters belong, because all deer hunters want to be better hunters. They want to have better deer, and they want to ensure that they leave something to deer hunters of the future. And so that's what we're about, and that's what your membership dollar supports. You learn, but you also give. Yeah, we would appreciate folks considering supporting us. We can use the support. We put that to good work for you. We teach you, and we do work for you.
I joined this year, so I know the value, but just so guys understand, even if you're a public land hunter or part of a lease, or you're not necessarily going to be changing habitat and that kind of stuff, just so you understand, the membership's $35 for a whole year. You get 6 issues of the Quality Whitetails magazine. You get a logo hat, a grunt call, an Aging and Scoring Bucks DVD, a car decal, and then you get access to additional material. So, I mean, for $35, just to know, seems like there wouldn't be anything left for some of those other benefits, just going towards the deer population and education and that kind of stuff. I think it's pretty neat that you guys are able to offer all that value.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm proud to be a part of this organization, and so yeah, we certainly appreciate your support, guys, and thank you for having me on here and letting me talk a little bit about it. But let me say this: that about the magazine, you're talking about leaseholding versus owning the land. The new issue of the magazine has got an article on hunting WMAs and strategies for hunting public lands, and it's got a ton of stuff on deer behaviors and deer science, and just a lot of stuff that is valuable to any deer hunter, whether you hunt private land, public land, you lease land, it doesn't matter. I mean, that's the vast majority of what we talk about is stuff that any deer hunter can use and enjoy. So, don't feel like just because you don't own land, you're not you don't belong here. All deer hunters belong here.
Thanks again, Lindsay. We really appreciate your time. I think we just got a ton of value in this. Like Adam said, I think we all have some homework we can go home and look at what we're going to be able to do to get ready for this next deer season.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry we went long, but it's been a blast. I really enjoyed it.
It was well worth it. Thanks a lot, Lindsay.
All right. Take care, guys.
Thanks.
Mike, that was just an awesome phone call we just had with Lindsay.
You mean that phone call we had with Lindsay like 5 days ago, because we're recording the outros now?
Yes, because that's the way we operate.
Yes, that was a really good phone call. Man, I thought we were going to be doing our first mobile podcast from the Deer Summit until he shot me down saying we're not scientific enough.
That did kind of hurt my feelings. I actually re-listened to that today, and I thought, he's probably right. We would have no freaking clue what they were talking about.
Yep. I'm glad that we had Lindsay Thomas to come translate for us because, man, he had some good information. You know, that article he did, I think, had like 15 different topics, and I feel like we only covered 3 or 4 of them. But, man, I feel like we got a ton of value out of what we did talk about.
That's true, and I've actually been obsessing about coyotes after the last few phone calls, just based off of what we've talked about, and I've been doing some back end research there. So I'm actually really enjoying these conversations about whitetails.
So what are we talking about here? Are we talking about coyotes or coyotes or yotes? Or, man, I've been editing the podcast, and I feel like, man, I don't even know what I normally call them, but apparently I call them coyote in the podcast. So I guess that's what I'm going with.
You do call them coyote. Well,
Yeah.
coyote. I don't even know what the heck that sounds like. I'm usually a cross between coyote and yodi or yoder. Yeah, I don't know where that came from. But I have some family, I'm pretty sure that say yodi.
Yeah. Sometimes I might say like a nasty. Actually, I don't think I ever say nasty yote. I feel like that's a cool thing to call them, but yeah, I guess apparently I call them coyote.
You do say coyote.
I guess that's what the guy born in Wisconsin, moved down to Florida, calls them.
Yeah, it's a weird translation, but anyways, yeah.
So, but we also talked about some cool deer stuff too. Man, I love getting into that scientific stuff, just like we did last week. Lindsay didn't disappoint.
Not at all.
All right, so let's talk about what we need to get this thing wrapped up. We need everybody to subscribe, first of all, and leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Podbean, Google Play, apparently, which I haven't figured out how to do that yet, but hopefully y'all are smarter than I am and figured out how to leave us a review, and we really appreciate it. That's going to help us get the ratings up on this thing and hopefully get some big-name guests down the road when they see how popular we are.
Hey, and do we have a website?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we should mention that. DownSouthHunting.com. Man, I had to win an auction to get that thing, so we better use it. Won an auction to get that because somebody else didn't renew it. So good for us.
Hey, did you have to pay like $50 or $50,000? Because when I was buying domains one time, I was talking to somebody about, how much the domain name costs, and there was a particular domain name that I wanted, the .com, and it was $50,000. And they asked me if I spent the $50,000 on my website, and I just wanted to be like, really? You think I got the kind of money to spend $50,000 on a website? I'm not trying to buy Cabela's here.
Yeah.
So
you tell me your budget was capped at $30,000.
Yeah, $30,000 or worth
not
$30.
A dime more. Yeah. The winning bid for Down South Hunting was $10. So, but by the time we're done with this podcast, it's probably going to be worth $50,000.
That's very true. I can't imagine it not being worth that much.
All right, man. All right, until next time, I guess our taglines, do something cool.
Do something cool. Stay cool.
All right, bye.
See ya.